Hello, this is Miss Igo. Welcome to my classroom. In this video, we're going to be talking about factoring trinomials. A trinomial is a polynomial with three terms. The first types of trinomials that we're going to factor are trinomials with leading coefficients of 1, which means that when we look at our trinomial in descending order, the coefficient of our first term, the coefficient of our x squared, is an understood 1. So all we see for our first term in every one of these is x squared. Now, when we factor a trinomial, our result or our answer is going to be two binomials. So remember, binomials have two terms. So I'm going to go ahead and write my two sets of parentheses to represent my binomials, and we're just going to fill that in. Now, factoring a trinomial is like undoing or doing the opposite of foiling. If we think about what it means to foil, we foil whenever we have two binomials. So if we foil two binomials, our result is a trinomial. So now we're starting with the trinomial and we're going to factor into two binomials. So it's going backwards from foiling. So that means that whatever we put in these first two spots, just like foil the first two spots, they have to multiply to give us the first term. Whatever goes in the last two spots have to multiply to give us the last term. And then the outer and inner, the O and the I of foil, are going to combine to give me my middle term. So for the first term, what would we multiply to get x squared? X times x would give us x squared. Now let's determine what signs need to go in our binomials. For that, we always look at the second sign in our trinomial first. This sign is going to tell me whether the signs in my binomials are the same or different. If this is a plus sign, then the signs in my binomials are going to be the same. If it's a minus sign, then the signs in my binomials are going to be different. Because this is a plus sign, I know these two signs are going to be the same. And then this sign tells me what they are. Okay, so since that's a plus, that means we already know they're the same, and then that tells me that they're both positive. Now, as I said earlier, these last two spots have to multiply to give me my last term. So I need to determine what the factors of 6 are. The factors of 6 are 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. 1 times 6 is 6, and 2 times 3 is also 6. So those are the factors of 6. Now I need to figure out which ones I want to use. Because my signs are the same, that means I'm going to be adding my factors. I can also just look at this sign and that'll tell me what I'm going to be doing with my factors. This is a plus sign, so I know I'm going to be adding them. So which one of the factors of 6, 1 and 6, or 2 and 3, would add to give me 5? 2 and 3. Okay, so that's what I put in my binomials. Now, it doesn't matter if I did x plus 2 and x plus 3, or if I did x plus 3 first and then x plus 2. My signs are the same, so it doesn't matter which group I put the 2 and the 3 in. Now, to check our answer, so this would be my answer, to check it, remember, anytime we factor, we can always multiply our result back together to see if we get what we started with. So as long as we get what we started with when we multiply our terms back together, then we know that we factored correctly. So let's do that now. Okay, we really don't have to do the first two terms because we already said we know to get x squared we would multiply x times x. And then to get the 6, we already knew that we had the factors of 6. So 2 times 3 is 6. So really the only thing that we have to double check when we're checking to see if we factored correctly is the inner and the outer two terms. 2 times x, positive 2 times x would give me a 2x. X times 3, positive x times positive 3 would give me a positive 3x. These are both positive. And when I put those together, I get a positive 5x. So that's what my middle term is there. So I know that I factored it correctly. So that means that this is my solution. And as I said earlier, it doesn't matter what order those binomials are in. I could have also had x plus 3 and x plus 2. That would have been a correct answer for factoring this trinomial. Okay, let's look at the next example. It's very similar to the first one. We have the same numbers, but if you'll notice, we have a sign that's different. So let's see what that changes in the way that we factor. So we're going to start out again with 2 sets of parentheses because I know that my answer is going to be 2 binomials. Since I have an x squared as my leading coefficient, I know that I would get that by multiplying x times x. Now let's see what our signs are. Remember, we look at the second sign first, and if that's a plus sign, what does that mean? It means that the signs in my 2 binomials are going to be the same. However, in this example, my first sign is a minus. So remember, that tells me what my signs are. They're the same, but this time they're both going to be subtraction. Well, they're still the same, so if my signs are the same, that still means that I'm going to be adding my inner and my outer two terms. And again, like I said, whatever this sign is, that tells me what I'm going to be doing with my 2 middle terms. So I'm going to be adding them. So I need the factors of 6 that would add to give me 5. Well, just like before, the factors of 6 that add to give me 5 are 2 and 3. So again, it doesn't matter what order I put them in. I could put x minus 3 and x minus 2, or x minus 2 and x minus 3. And either way would be fine. So if I double check that, remember I only need to do the inner and the outer, then that gives me a negative 2x and a negative 3x, which would combine to give me a negative 5x. And that's what I needed it to be. That's what my middle term is. I like to say I do my smiley face because this looks like a nose and this looks like a mouth. So when I check my binomials to see if I factored a trinomial correctly, I just say, let's do our smiley face. So I did my smiley face. It worked out right, so I know that this is my correct factorization. Okay, let's look at the next example. Again, we have the same numbers, but our signs are a little different. So if I do my 2 sets of parentheses, in the first 2 spots, I'm going to have x and x. Now when I look at my second sign, the negative tells me that my signs are going to be different. Okay, so one's going to be positive and one's going to be negative. The first sign now is not going to tell me what they are because they're not the same. The first sign tells me the sign of the bigger number. Okay, I'll show you what I mean by that in just a minute. So we know that our signs are different, so that means we're going to be subtracting, or again, if I looked at my second sign, since that's a minus, I know I'm going to be subtracting. So I need the factors of 6 still, but this time that will subtract to give me 5. I've been using 2 and 3, but if I subtract 2 from 3, I get 1, not 5. If I subtract 1 from 6, then I get 5. So that means these are the factors that would subtract to give me 5. Now, I have 1 and I have a 6. Remember, this tells me the sign of my bigger number. So that means the 6 needs to be positive and the 1 needs to be negative. Now, if you don't remember that little rule, or just always check by doing your smiley face. So let's do that now. If I do my smiley face, that gives me positive 6, and positive x give me a positive 6x. Positive 6 and negative 1 give me a negative 1x. And if I combine those, that gives me a positive 5x. And that's what I wanted it to be. So if I worked this out and I got a negative 5x, or if I had put the 2 and the 3 in there, I would have gotten a 1. Then I know it's wrong. So that's why we should check with our smiley face to make sure that we factored it correctly. And so that's my solution. Okay, this last example with the same numbers. So we did one that had both positives, one that had a negative and a positive, one that had a positive and a negative. Now we have one that has two negatives. Again, we start with our two sets of parentheses. What goes in the first two spots? X and X. So we look at the second sign. This tells me that my signs are going to be what? Different. Okay, so one positive and one negative. Or you could put the negative one first. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is the right number goes with the right sign. So just like before, when we're subtracting, this tells me we're going to be subtracting. I need the factors of 6 that would subtract to give me 5. So again, that would be the 1 and the 6. Those would subtract to give me 5. But this time, my first sign is a minus. So that means the bigger number needs to be minus. So the 6 needs to go with the minus sign and the 1 with the plus sign. And if we do our smiley face to check, this gives me a positive 1x and a negative 6x, which would add to give me a negative 5x. Okay, and that's a negative 5, so I know that this is right. Okay, let's look at a trinomial that has some different numbers. This is still a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1. And so we're going to do our two sets of parentheses. And just like every time we have an x squared as our first term, our first terms in our binomials are going to be x and x. Okay, look at the second sign. That tells me if they're the same or different. Plus means that they're the same. Then this one tells me what they are. They're both going to be a plus. Now let's list out the factors of 24. We have 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, and 4 and 6. So I need the factors of 24 that would add to give me 11. Which factors of 24 would add to give me 11? 8 and 3. And again, since the signs are the same, it doesn't matter which one I put as 8 and which one I put as 3. And then we can check with our smiley face to make sure that we are going to get an 11 whenever I do the outer and the inner. That's a positive 3x. And that's a positive 8x, which gives me a positive 11x. So this is my answer. This, or you could have x plus 8 times x plus 3. All right, for this one, two sets of parentheses, x and x. Are my signs the same or different? This means they're different, so one of each. The factors of 18 are 1 times 18, 2 times 9, and 3 times 6. Since my signs are different, then I know I'm going to be subtracting. So which one of these factors would subtract to give me 7? 2 and 9. Okay, so remember when they're different, then this tells me the sign of the bigger number. The bigger number is 9, so that means the 9 needs to be negative, and the 2 is positive. When we do our smiley face to check, that gives me a plus 2x and a minus 9x. So that would give me a negative 7x, and that's what I need it to be. So I know this is factored correctly. No matter what type of polynomial you're factoring, you should always check for a GCF first, or a greatest common factor. If we look at this trinomial has a greatest common factor of 6. Every term in this trinomial can be divided by 6. So, if your trinomial has a greatest common factor, you need to factor that out first. So, I'm going to factor out a 6, which means that I'm basically just going to divide every term in the trinomial by 6. And the 6 goes on the outside of my parentheses, and then I'm going to write what's left once I divide by 6. Okay, so I have x squared, 24 divided by 6, that would be plus 4x. And then 18 will go into, or 6 will go into 18 3 times. Okay, so once I factor out a greatest common factor, that's just going to tag along with my answer, and now I have this trinomial that I'm going to factor into 2 binomials. So once I factored out the greatest common factor, I now have a trinomial with a leading coefficient of 1. So this x squared, again, will factor into x times x. What are the only factors of 3? 1 and 3, right? Okay, so 1 and 3 or 3 and 1. This tells me that my signs are the same, and this tells me they're both plus. So the way we double check this, if we wanted to, once we have it factored like this, I can do my smiley face on the inner and the outer. That would be plus 1x and plus 3x, which would give me a plus 4x. Well, this would be the same as what I had before or after I took out the 6. If I wanted to keep going and make sure all the way to the back that I did it correctly, I would need to multiply the rest of these terms and then distribute the 6. So remember, we know that the x and the x give us the x squared. Then we have this plus 4x. And then 1 times 3 is 3. Bring down the 6. Now, if I were to distribute the 6 to all of these terms, that would give me 6x squared plus 24x plus 18, which is what I started with at the very beginning. Now, to factor a trinomial that has a leading coefficient other than 1, there's several different methods that can be used to do so. You can do guess and check. There's a box method. My favorite method is slide and divide. So that's what I'm going to teach you today. To do the slide and divide method, we're basically going to change this into the types of trinomials that we just got finished working with. And to do that, we're going to take our leading coefficient, which is 3, and we're going to slide it to the back by using multiplication. So when I do that, I get x squared minus 4x, and then I slide that to the back and multiply, and I would get a negative 21. So now I have a trinomial like what we just worked with. And I'm going to break that down into 2 binomials, or factor that into 2 binomials. My first 2 spots are x and x. This tells me that my signs are different. And then the factors of 21, we have 1 and 21, and 3 and 7. Okay, so my signs are different. That means I'm going to be subtracting. Remember, this tells me what I'm going to be doing with my numbers. I'm subtracting. So which one of these would subtract to give me 4? 3 and 7. And then remember, this tells me the sign of the bigger number. So my bigger number, my 7, needs to be negative, and my 3 is positive. Now, we can't forget the last step. When we do the slide and divide method, we just slid. Now we have to divide. Whatever we slid to the back, that's what we have to divide by. We have to divide these numbers by the same thing that we multiplied by. Okay, if it will reduce to a single number, then we do so. So this would be x plus 1. If it will not reduce and it won't turn into a whole number, then we bring this in front of the x in that binomial. So that gives me a 3x minus 7. And that's going to be my solution. We can check it by multiplying it back together, and that's what I'm going to do. If I multiply x times 3x, that gives me 3x squared. My outer 2 would give me a negative 7x. My inner 2, that's plus 3x. And then my last 2 would be a negative 7. If I combine my two middle terms, my two like terms, I get 3x squared. That's a negative 4x minus 7, and that's what I started with. So I know that this right here is correct. Okay, again, let's do the slide and divide method. We have a leading coefficient other than 1. Always go ahead and check, when we have numbers in every term, see if there's a greatest common factor. There's nothing that 7, 5, and 2 can all be divided by. So there's not a greatest common factor. So we're going to do the slide and divide. I'm sliding the 7 to the back by multiplication. That gives me x squared plus 5x. 7 times 2, that would be a negative 14. So now we factor into two binomials, x and x. This tells me that my signs are different. The factors of 14 are 1 and 14 and 2 and 7. So which ones will subtract to give me 5? 2 and 7. Then this tells me the sign of the bigger number. My 7 is bigger, so my 7 is plus, and my 2 is minus. And then don't forget the last step. We have to divide by what we slid to the back. So we divide by 7. This will turn into a 1, so I have x plus 1. This will not reduce. It won't turn into a whole number, so I need to bring the 7 in front of the x, and I have 7x minus 2. So again, we can multiply it back together to check it, but this is my solution. Okay, I have one more example for you. Let's slide and divide again. Once again, 5, 1, and 6 don't have a greatest common factor. So I'm going to slide this 5 to the back. X squared minus x, and then minus 5 times 6, that would be 30. Okay, two sets of parentheses, x and x. So the factors of 30, we have 1 and 30, 2 and 15, 3 and 10, and 5 and 6. All right, so we need the factors of 30 that will subtract to give me 1. So that would be 5 and 6. This tells me that my signs are different. And then this tells me the sign of the bigger number. So the 6 is negative, the 5 is positive. And then again, we slid, so we can't forget to divide. We need to divide by the 5. And so I get x plus 1. 5 divided by 5 is 1. This won't divide, so I'll bring the 5 in front. And I have 5x minus 6. And that's my solution. And that's how we factor trinomials. Thank you for watching.